Time with Terry, coming to you from the Space Coast of sunny Florida. I'm Terry, a retired PT assistant who has worked with seniors my entire career. My mission is to be a senior advocate to connect you with an amazing network of resources in Brevard County because we care about our seniors. Well, my trivia question today is, which ancient civilization believed that speaking a person's name kept their memory alive forever? Well, the reason I'm asking this question is because of my lovely guest, Rachel. She is an end-of-life doula, and that is something that's new to me, is very, very interesting. I've heard of there's doulas for midwives, but end of life, I think it's wonderful what you do. So tell us about yourself. You were born in Chicago.
I was born in Chicago. I lived there all the way through college. And then after college, I moved to Wisconsin. I majored in broadcast journalism, and I was working as an assistant producer in Chicago at WBBM radio, which was a dream, at that point in my life. But I really wanted to get on the air, and that wasn't possible in Chicago, so I had to go to a smaller market. Mm-hmm. And so I moved to La Crosse, Wisconsin, where my grandparents lived, and started working at a radio station there, and just kind of moved on from there.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yep.
And you were media relations for the Tommy Thompson, who was the governor at the time?
Yes. So I moved from La Crosse, Wisconsin to Madison, Wisconsin, mm-hmm. where I was also a reporter and a news director. And after a while, I just didn't feel like that was my calling. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to figure out what to do with my life. And one of my friends from radio worked for the lieutenant governor, and she was looking for a communications person. And so she hired me in that role, and I stayed in that role for a while. And then I got a job in Governor Tommy Thompson's office. And I was a deputy press secretary there. Mm-hmm. Primarily, I did speech writing. I would do some talking with the media and preparing press releases, but primarily I was a speechwriter for Governor Thompson and his wife, Sue Ann.
Nice. Very nice.
And that was fun. Mm-hmm. That was fun at that time of my life. I was in my 20s, and we worked a lot of hours, and we were always doing something, but it was a good time.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Great. So what brought you to Florida?
My kids, well, I should back up. I wanted to move to Florida ever since my dad took us to Disney when I was 10 years old. And when I graduated college, I did try to get a reporter job in Florida, to no avail. And so I gave up and just kept plugging away in the Midwest. And long story short, met my husband, so figured that's why I was supposed to stay in the Midwest, so I would meet him. Kids went all the way through high school, and then my daughter found Florida Tech because she wanted to major in ocean engineering. Mm-hmm. So she came here. She's in her third year of college, and her brother Keegan is 1 year behind her in school, and he decided he wanted to come to Florida Tech as well. So at that point, I said to my husband, okay, both kids are going to be in Florida. I've wanted to live here my whole life, so it's my turn. I'm going too. And mm-hmm. my poor husband still is back in Wisconsin in the cold and travels back and forth. But we sold our house there, mm-hmm. bought one here in Melbourne, and love every second of it.
Good.
Love it.
Well,
yeah.
That's good. That's
mm-hmm.
good. You can be here with your kids, and
it is.
The kids were great. Were catalysts to get you here.
Yep. And we had traveled to Florida basically throughout their entire childhood, so both of them were very comfortable coming to Florida. We're totally a Disney family, so we traveled to Disney almost yearly. So it's really nice now that we can just drive there in an hour.
Mm-hmm. Great. That's great. Yeah, it's it. And too, we in Florida we do get some discounts, for some of the, which is good because
it makes a
things
difference.
Things are a little expensive, so it's nice to get that Florida discount.
It is. Yeah. So that's been a huge blessing, and the kids are what brought us here. Mm-hmm. But we had intended to retire here anyways. We're not at retirement yet, but we're, wanting to be here from here on out.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Yeah.
Good, especially with the weather.
Yes.
we were talking about the weather, and it was just like, I know the other day it was 75. I talked to a friend of mine from Pennsylvania, and she's like, yeah, it's snowing. And I'm like, oh, I hate to tell you this, but it was 75 degrees here today. And she's like, I don't want to hear it.
Yep, that's all my family too. My dad will be like, I don't think I want to ask you, but I really want to know what's the temperature there today. I'm like, oh, it's 80. I'm sitting by the pool. The dogs are running around. He's like, it's 40 below zero here.
I know. It's wonderful to live in Florida.
I know. I just apologize a lot.
That's great.
Yep.
So tell me about this end of life, being an end of life doula.
Yes.
So you have your certification. You have
I
a certification.
do. So I received my certification through the University of Vermont Lerner School of Medicine. There are several places that you can go to get a certification to be a doula. It's not a license. It's not regulated by the government. It's just basically an education program. And it really goes deep into, many aspects of sitting with people who are at end of life. But prior to that, the reason I made a total career switch, well, I stayed home with my kids. After I had my daughter, I decided I was going to be a stay-at-home mom, and then I had my son shortly after. And during the time of being home with them, I had a friend who was diagnosed with ALS, and I wanted to go and see her, and I just kept feeling that nudge, you need to go see her, you need to go see her. But I had heard that she couldn't talk at all anymore, and so I was very nervous about how I would communicate with her. And we were both very close to our priest at our church, and so I knew that he would know how I should communicate with her. So I went and talked to him, and he said, oh, it's no worry. She has a keyboard that she can use her fingers to type out messages to you. So you will have no trouble communicating. So that relieved some of my fears, and I started visiting her. And what started as, an occasional visit then turned into weekly visits. And I would just, sometimes I'd just sit with her. Sometimes she needed things. Sometimes she was mentoring me. I mean, it was just the most beautiful experience, and it just really ignited my heart for this kind of work. And I had decided while she was still alive that when she was no longer with us, that I was going to volunteer at that facility. You have to go through training. You have to wait a year after someone you love dies before you become a volunteer. So I waited that year, and then I became a volunteer there. And I was a companion volunteer, and I was also a vigil volunteer. So companion, I would sometimes just sit and talk with people. Maybe we'd do a puzzle. I would say more often than not, people just wanted to talk about their life and let you know that they were someone before they were laying in this bed and unable to do anything. Mm-hmm. It varied what people needed. But then I would also get called to sit vigil when someone was actively dying, either to relieve their family who had been up for many nights already, or if someone didn't have family and they really would prefer to have someone sit with them. So that is just kind of what got me into doing this, and it's just a passion of mine.
Was that working with hospice? Were you working with hospice?
Yep.
Okay.
So I was at a hospice in Wisconsin, near Madison, Wisconsin, and I would do a weekly shift, and then the vigils were an on-call schedule. So you get a call if someone was in need, and you would sit either it was usually from 8 to midnight or midnight to 4 in the morning. And so I would always try whenever I got called to go, because I felt if I was getting the call, I was supposed to be there.
Well, it's such a comfort, it is such a comfort for them, because people want to know that their life mattered. I know it's like, when they're laying in that bed, it's like my mom too, she had Alzheimer's, and at the end of her life, she was, she was not talking, and, just she couldn't talk. And I told everybody, I don't care who they were, when they walked in the room, I said, this is my mom. She was very, very productive in society. She worked for the Alzheimer's Association. So I told her about it, because I wanted to let them know that she had a purpose in her life.
Yes.
And she helped a lot of people out. And I think people want to let people know, I'm not just a helpless person here laying in bed.
Yeah.
I contributed to society. I raised my family. I had a productive job, and I think that's great that they want some validation at the end of their life too, to know I had a purpose and served my community.
Absolutely.
So that's great.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of what I did as a companion volunteer was listen. And it's something I think that's kind of a lost art in today's society, is just sitting and listening to someone else and not interjecting your own story, or not coming over the top, or just sitting and being present and listening is an absolute gift to somebody.
Right. Right.
And it's a beautiful experience, and it's a beautiful thing for the person listening, because you're just gaining this whole gift of knowing about somebody that you'd never spent time with your whole life, and here they are at the end of their life spending time with me, and that was just such a privilege. It is a privilege.
It is.
Yeah.
I know. When I was a therapist too, I would always ask my patients, so what did you do for a living? It's like, what, because it made them feel important. They were doctors or a carpenter or, a lumberjack or whatever they were, that they had, that they had a job, and they took care of their family, and, like I said, contributed to society. So they were like, okay, I was, they still are a person, but you know what I'm saying is that, that they, yeah.
I spent some time with
Yeah.
my dad in the hospital. My dad's had some close calls, we'll call them, and he had quadruple bypass surgery. That the surgery went well, but afterwards there were some complications. And when he finally woke up and was able to speak, which took a while, I came in one time and he was telling his nurse all about how he was a Harley rider and he had been a barber his whole life. And my dad's a very social person. I mean, he was a barber. He talked to people all day long. And I was just so happy that he was able to do that. And he had this phenomenal nurse who just was a gem. And he just listened and encouraged him. And I thought the same thing, like, well, he just wants them to know I wasn't always this person who can hardly now get out of bed because I've been laying here for weeks. I had a life, and it was important and still is important. I just got to get back to where I was. And,
Right.
And he did, thankfully.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, he's doing great.
Great. So you work for hospice. So what is the difference with what you do and hospice?
Yes. So there certainly could be a little bit of overlap, but I would say, generally speaking, hospice is amazing. And I am a huge proponent of hospice. And I also worked at a hospice after being a volunteer. I worked as a hospice volunteer coordinator. And to see the circle of care that hospice provides is amazing. And I think the unfortunate thing is that so many people wait until their last weeks of life to get on hospice. And I think if they only understood that the earlier you go on hospice, the more care you are provided. And as you know, hospice, has a circle of care with the nurse, the CNA who's doing personal cares, the chaplain who will talk about spiritual things if someone chooses, a social worker who's trying to help with their living arrangements or their advanced directives or making sure that things are in place. And then, of course, there's a volunteer component. All of those things, I would say, are critical to somebody who is at end of life, and hospice does an amazing job with that. Where I fit in is I can go a little bit deeper on some of the things that hospice doesn't have time for. They have so many patients. They are regulated by how often they can see someone and for how long, where I can come in and basically complement what they are doing. So, for instance, I would do things like, we'll sit vigil. Sometimes at the hospice I was at, they wouldn't be able to get enough volunteers to come in to sit vigil. So sometimes they need someone beyond their volunteers. I work on legacy projects with people. So this might take a little bit longer. I can write somebody's life story. We can create a recipe box that can be passed down through the generations. We can do interviews so that their voice remains. So I do kind of a little bit something that goes above where they might be able to provide their hospice patient, not because they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing or because they're falling short, but because there's only so far that they can go, and I can go a little bit deeper or assist with things. For instance, there was one gentleman that will always remain in my heart that I sat with as a companion. He lived at the hospice facility where I was the volunteer. He was there for over a year. Oh, wow. And he was a social, adorable gentleman, and he wanted me to stay in his room my entire shift. But this was a 50-bed facility, and so I could only spend, I couldn't play favorites, and so I'd go in, do a puzzle for a little while, and then I'd have to move on and, do something else, and he would never want me to leave. And so in a situation like that, where you have someone who needs more, I can provide that more. Now, that's not everybody. Not everybody needs that, but some people do. And some families do. Some families need more support. They need, one thing that I think about a lot is I have a friend who is a caregiver for her dad. And sometimes I'll just say, well, how are you doing? Or, what can I do for you? And she's like, I don't even know what you can do for me. She's so overwhelmed. She can't even think of it. Right. And so, and I think in a situation like that, as a doula, I can come in and say, all right, let's talk about who your circle of support is. Let's talk about who your communities are. A lot of people have a church community, or they have a group of friends, or their neighbors. Everybody wants to help in some way. I can help say, all right, what are the things you need? Where are things falling short? Do you need your lawn mowed? Do you need some meals a couple times a week? Could you use someone just to come and do a load of laundry once a week, and try to organize additional assistance just to make it easier for the caregiver? I provide a lot of caregiver support too. And some of that can just be, I will sit for 2 hours, you go have coffee with a friend, take a long shower, take a walk around the block, whatever you need to refresh, because caregivers really... oftentimes caregivers get sick because they're, overwhelmed. And it's not that they don't want the help. It's just, it's so hard to figure out what you need when you're just trying to make it through moment to moment.
Right. Right. Well, that's nice, though, that you can organize, because I know sometimes people are just so overwhelmed. They can't, they just can't think, there is so much, but I just, I can't put it down on paper. And if you sit down and talk to them and say, okay, let's see, let's kind of relax and see what you need. That's wonderful that you can do that, because there are people, that do say, well, what can I do to help? And, and it's like, I don't, they're like, I don't know. But if you have a list, if you make a list and say, can you mow the yard? Can you just sit with them for a few hours, or, give them choices of what they can do? And it's nice that you can organize with them, because some people, like with their church, or a lot of, they have groups of friends that really do want to help, but they, they don't know what they can do, because they don't want the caregiver to burn out, which I know I took care of my mom. It's easy to do, but, if somebody says, can I help you? You go, yes.
Especially if it's a suggestion, too, of like, well, how about I do this? Then the caregiver doesn't have to think about it. It's more, and part of that would be me just getting to know people, too, and just having that time to, try to figure out ways that I can make their lives a little bit easier. If you were to ask me what my goal is, I would say my goal is to help people find peace and joy at the end of life, and their caregivers. And caregivers often can't find that because they are so bogged down in all the things that they have to do. And sometimes I can be there so that they can just be with their loved one, rather than having to always be doing something.
That's nice.
Yeah. And I think, too, the other thing that comes to mind in all of that is that I also encourage communication among family members. We all have family dynamics. We all have different things that happen, at this time of life. And even if there isn't necessarily always agreement, trying to facilitate necessary discussions so there can be some peace within that family, especially for the person who is ill. I think those kind of open conversations are so important. And then planning for how the remaining days go. Because like I mentioned with that gentleman who I just adored going to visit all of the time, you know, he was there for over a year. I think it's really a precious thing when you can talk to someone about, okay, so what do you want the next year of your life to look like? What are those things that you really want to make sure happen? For this gentleman, he wanted to see his great granddaughter. She was born in another country, and he was waiting and waiting for them to come and visit, and he got to visit her. So she did make it before he passed away, which that was his only wish. But, you know, there's other people who will say, there was a lady that I worked with when I was a hospice volunteer coordinator. She wanted to start clearing out stuff from her condo because she didn't want someone else to have to clear it out. And so we got a volunteer for her, and that volunteer helped her, and she wanted it specifically to go to the homeless. And so that volunteer would drop things off specifically at a homeless shelter so that all of those items would go for people that she had earmarked them for. And that helped her find peace to know that, number one, she was clearing out her place, but she was also giving to a good cause.
Well, that's good. And like a recipe box, you know, I know like with my mom, I'm like, you know, people are like, do you have the recipe that your mom made, like the chicken salad or whatever? And I'm like, no, I don't. But you hear that a lot from family members. It's like, you know, I wish I had mom's, you know, whatever recipe, and having a recipe box would be great. And, you know, like you were saying, that, you know, projects and letters. Yeah. Like maybe there's something that they want to say to somebody in a letter that, you know, they've been putting off, or, you know, how much they mean to them, or if it's an apology, or could be a number of things that you really want to say to somebody.
And not letting that. And I might have mentioned this to you, I can't remember, but my friend Jan that I told you about that had ALS, she had a volunteer write a letter to me, and I had no idea. And it was just so precious. I mean, it was just short, it, you know, wasn't real long and involved, but it's, you know, still sitting in my nightstand, and I pull it out every once in a while and think about her. So it's a precious thing to have from somebody. And I also think another legacy project that I just think is so beautiful is if you have someone who has, like, for instance, my grandma had a lot of china or little knick-knacky type things, and she also had a lot of grandchildren. And so after she passed, we all went and took something that was meaningful for us. So I have this beautiful cup and saucer, and I have a little saying about grandmas that she had in her house. And to be able to do that ahead of time with someone and say, okay, do you think there's something that you really, and not necessarily, it doesn't have to be like a expensive piece of jewelry or anything, but something meaningful that you want for somebody specific, and then you write a little letter to go with it, and either give it to them while you're still alive, or have a little bin with all of that ready to go, all wrapped up with your letter for when you pass. And then each of those people get this special gift from you.
Oh, that's sweet.
You
That's
know?
a nice, that's nice. Like having the jewelry and write a little note along with it that how much that they meant to the person. Yeah, that's nice. I know.
Because how often do we not say those things to
right.
people?
Yeah, because there is. I know it's like the person too. It's like the person that is passing. You know, they're like, you know, they want to say things to their family or their friends, and then their family, you know, it's like they would. You know, they're like, oh, I wish I would have said this to grandma or whatever. And then, you know, it's nice that you can kind of be a mediator with them and kind of, you know, guide them so that they can get together and, you know, exchange lovely, you know, words with each other. And then sometimes, like you were saying too, with family members, sometimes there can be a little, you know, a little tension with the families, and you can kind of sort of step in and kind of help smooth things out a little bit there.
And sometimes I think, too, that comes with advanced planning, and not just advanced directives, you know, with legally what you want, but, you know, who do you want in the room with you when you are kind of taking that turn and you're entering the active dying phase? Are there people that you want there? Are there people you don't want there? Because if you spell that out ahead of time, it makes it much easier when that time comes that, if there was a troubled member of the family and they're causing trouble, it's like, well, so-and-so wrote down that, you can't be in the room at this time. It helps to not leave it to somebody else to make that decision, that the person who is sick makes those decisions if they so choose. Maybe they don't want to make those decisions, but I think, kind of spelling those things out, or spelling out at a time somebody's actively dying, we know they can still hear, but if they're not able to communicate, have they kind of laid out how they want that to look? Do they want candles burning in the room? Would they like hymns playing? Contemporary Christian music, prayers being said, lavender scent in the room. There's very beautiful things that can make that time peaceful. I mean, I can say of the times that I've sat vigil with people who were actively dying, most of them were extremely peaceful. Now, there are exceptions, and sometimes it has to do with things that have happened in life that make that end of life not peaceful. But for the most part, I would say it can be a very peaceful and inspirational time.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. And I know, I mean, you have the environmental, and you help the family with the grief before and after, because you're grieving. I mean, for some, I know with my mom, it's like we were grieving before. I mean, for months, my sister and I were like grieving, her loss.
Yep.
And then when she passed, it was kind of like, it was like we had peace then when she did pass, because we knew she's with the Lord and she's in a better place. But, for some families, they need that comfort as the person is dying, because everybody grieves differently too, and they grieve afterwards. Some of them. So that's great that you're there to comfort them at that time as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that especially because your mom had Alzheimer's, right?
Right.
So, there's a lot of grief that happens before
Years,
a person.
yeah.
I mean, you're losing them for so long that,
Right.
yeah.
It's a long, painful. Yeah.
Yep.
It's a sad death.
Yeah.
To see that. But for some people, some people are alert, and they're oriented, and they can talk to their family. And that's wonderful that they can kind of talk through things as they are dying. And, there's a lot of things, maybe issues that they need to work out as they are passing. And then when they pass, you are there for the comfort as well.
Yep.
So good.
Yeah.
So you're an advocacy, you're an advocate, to help communicate the wishes to the family, and for the caregivers and for the person.
And I would say, too, during that active dying process, there's a book that I tell everybody about. I had to read it when I went through my training, and there's probably many that are similar. It's written by 2 hospice nurses. It's called Final Gifts. And it talks about the communication of the dying and how there are patterns that happen to help you understand, because people might write it off as confusion, but your loved one is really trying to tell you something. And I saw this after I read that book, and I was with people who were very close to death. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is just like was in the book. So, for example, one of my favorite stories in that book was a husband and a wife, and the wife was dying. The wife handled everything around the house. So she was the doer and the organizer, and they both traveled a lot together. And he was struggling with her decline. And one time the hospice nurse came over, and she was very anxious. And so her husband was very anxious, and he met the hospice nurse at the door, and it's like, something's going wrong. Something must be physically wrong with her. She's very anxious, and I can't communicate with her, and she's picking at the bed covers and whatever. And she said, okay, well, let me just go in and see if I can figure out what's going on. And physically, she checked her out. There was nothing physical that was happening. And she was able to have a conversation with her. And basically what she gleaned from the conversation is that, number one, they talked about several things, and she had been saying some things to him. One of the things she kept saying to him was, it's time for me to get in line. And the other thing, or that was one of the things that he mentioned to the nurse. And so the nurse was talking to her and she said, "So you need to get in line." And she said, "Yes." But her husband couldn't get in line with her. And so she was upset about that. And the nurse further asked some more questions, which is always something that I encourage people to do when their loved one is saying things that might not make sense, is try to ask some questions, because it might make sense after you ask some questions. And so the nurse said, "Is there anybody else who's in line?" And she gave this beautiful smile, and she had had a daughter that had passed away young, and she said her daughter's name. Her daughter was already in line.
Aww.
And so the nurse figured out that she was telling him, "It's time for me to leave and you can't come with me, and I'm anxious about that." And as the nurse continued to ask her questions, she realized she was anxious because she was afraid of how he was going to get on without her, and if he was going to be able to handle all the things that he'd never handled before. So the nurse went out and talked with him more and said, just asked some pointed questions of him, like, "Do you think maybe she's worried about you? And, do you think you need to tell her maybe what your plans are after she dies so that she knows you're going to be okay?" And his reaction was, "I can't tell her what I'm going to do after she dies. That would be horrible." And the nurse basically said, "Well, I think that's what she needs." So he went in and he had this beautiful conversation with her, and they had a lot of tears. And I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful story. But when she was saying, "I need to get in line," that was her way of saying she was going to die soon.
Yeah.
And she was saying it that way because that's what they always did when they traveled, was they got in line. And so sometimes it's related to what your life has been. Like, I was a volunteer with a gentleman at the hospice facility that I mentioned, and he was a big car guy. And he would tell me all about it. And he had had a couple falls, and I had seen him start to decline. And one time I was in his room, and I kid you not, we're having a conversation, a very simple conversation. And all of a sudden he looks up and he goes, "What are you doing here?" And he was clearly having a conversation with someone that was nothing I could see. And then as quick as it started, he looked back at me and he said, "There's a car coming to pick me up."
Aww.
And I was like, all right. I knew. I was like, the next time I come here, he will not be here, because that's his way of telling me he's leaving.
Aww.
And sure enough, the next week he was gone.
Wow.
But that was his way, because he was a car guy. So somebody was picking him up in a car.
Oh,
And
that's
so it's just,
it makes me want to cry.
it's beautiful though. It's,
Yeah.
because at least I feel like it's comforting, for the person who's still left behind, to know they're trying to tell you what's happening. And the other thing that I will say for anybody who is going through it is that I do believe, and that book talks about it as well, that people choose when they take their last breath. Some people will wait till that last family member gets there, and some people will wait till their family leaves the room. And I've seen this happen a couple of times where it's like, "Oh, I just went out to go to the bathroom," and they took their last breath. And sometimes that is just on purpose.
Right.
To spare somebody, or, for whatever reasons we don't know, I guess, always.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard that too, that sometimes, and it's just like they want to die peacefully. They don't want to have, or they feel that they burden their family if they're there, and but for some people can handle it and some people can't.
Yeah.
They choose how they want to die. But I know it's very personal. I mean, like the car and the lady in line.
Yeah.
And it's, I know my mom sometimes, she would reach out for stuff. She would be like, reaching, and
Yeah.
and I'm like, it's like, whatever it is there, she was okay, because she was
seemed-
smiling.
yeah.
She would just reach up. So, you don't know what they see. I mean, a friend of hers says, too, you don't know what the person is going through, like if God is speaking to them, or if there's like angelic things that are, near the end that are talking to them. I don't know, but whatever it was peaceful. So I was like, whatever, God, if that's what that's fine with me.
Yep.
So my mom just kind of passed. I was in the room, but because I slept in the same room that she was in, and then all of a sudden she was just, she was gone. But, it was just a very, just slow, and
Yeah.
she just took her last breath, and I fell asleep, you know, but it was,
But you were there.
but but I was in the room with her. And so it was, but it's nice that there's people like you that helps with the family and helps them to have comfort and give them dignity and joy. And there's, a lot of things that complete them before they die. There's things that they want to take care of between not only them, but family members too.
Yep.
Family members want to say their last words or do something for them to let them know how much they love them.
Yeah.
So that's great that, that they have an end-of-life doula like you too.
And sometimes it's just nice to have somebody to help be that outside. You have that outside view where you're seeing all these things happen, because the people who are involved in it, there's so much emotion involved that sometimes they can't see the things that might need to be done to make it more peaceful. And as an outside person, I can see it like, oh, maybe those two need to have a conversation. Or maybe, the person who is ill needs to share that. They'll share something with me, but not with their loved one. And I can encourage. I mean, I don't force anything and I don't tell anybody what to do, but I can encourage, like, well, maybe you should tell them that. I think they'd like to know that. Or, it's sometimes it's just nice having that outside person to help things along.
'Cause you can, when you're not emotionally involved, you can see things that they don't see. It's not that you're not emotionally involved, because you do.
It's emotional,
we do,
for
right?
sure.
We do.
Yeah.
People that in the medical field and with that, but it's not as deep as a
Right.
family member is. So
Exactly.
yes,
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah.
And what is your availability to the client?
So basically, if somebody was interested in learning more about what I might be able to do for them, they can give me a call. They can, check out, I have a website. They can look at my website or send me an email. My website is sacredtime.net. My email is sacredtimefl, as in Florida, @gmail.com. My cell phone is 608-577-5076. They can reach out to me in any way, and we can just have a conversation about kind of where things are for them and what they might need. There is no charge for that whatsoever. And then we can come up with a plan if they're interested in that. I charge by the hour, but I will tell you that I will work on a sliding scale because I feel very strongly about what I do, and I won't turn anybody away. So depending on what the need is, and I think everybody's needs will be different on what they're feeling they need some assistance with, that I'll figure out a way to make it happen.
Just a few other questions, like, do you adapt to different spiritual and cultural beliefs?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Where I just meet people wherever they are.
Okay.
It's led by them. I don't come in with any agenda except for to help them find peace and joy. That would be my only agenda. Or trying to help the process.
And how do you handle emergencies or sudden changes in conditions when you're working with them?
I mean, if somebody called me and I was working with them and they were entering an active dying phase, I would do my best to get there. I would say the only way that I couldn't get there is if I was out of town for some reason. But that would be known ahead of time. Like, I would say, I'm going to be out of town these days or whatever. But otherwise, that is a very precious time, and I feel anybody I work with, I would want to be there at that time for whatever they needed and wherever they wanted me to be. I wouldn't it wouldn't be up to me. It would be up to them what they needed.
Right. Or you would contact hospice and, tell them to contact, tell them to contact hospice and let them know that the changes.
Yes,
as well,
for sure. Hospice would be number one.
Right.
Hospice would be the first call for the nurse to get there. Yeah.
Right. So, well, that's good. And, okay, well, it's very interesting. Is there anything that I didn't mention that you'd like to talk about?
Well, I guess the only thing I would say is I find your trivia question very interesting because it brings me great joy to be able to say my friend Janet's name because she was so inspirational to me, and it was several years ago now. It would have been like 2011, maybe. But to know that I still get to talk about her after all these years really brings me great joy. So your question fits in there very beautifully.
Yeah, I mean, it's great because, you help your clients and your caregivers to find peace, dignity, and joy in life's final season, which is great. So the trivia question again is, which ancient civilization believed that speaking a person's name kept their memory alive? And it was the Egyptians. And I know we had talked about the fact that, you do want to talk about your loved ones. I think a lot of people, when somebody dies, they're like, I don't know what to say, oh, I shouldn't mention them. And it's like, no, people want to talk about their loved ones because they want to make sure that they're remembered, that they lived and that they made a difference. So people do like to talk about that because, sometimes when I do, approach people, I had a patient one time and her daughter, she had a big picture of her daughter and she was like riding a horse and I was like, oh, who's that? And the husband was like, oh that's our daughter. She died. And I was like, oh, about 5 years ago. And I said, well, tell me about her. Like, what was she like? And, and they just kind of, it brightens them up because it's like, yeah, she's still a memory and she still exists she was part of our life. And so people like to talk about their loved one, when they pass. So, don't be afraid to ask them about the person, tell me about them. What were they like? So I think it's great that, you keep the memory alive. And my quotes, the quotes for today, which I love quotes. The first one is from Helen Keller. And what we have enjoyed deeply, we can never lose. All that we love becomes part of us. And then the other one is unknown. But when someone you love becomes a memory, the memory becomes a treasure. Yep. So, yeah.
That is true.
Very nice.
And I think we do need to talk about it more. We need to talk about those who have died, and we need to be comfortable asking people, like you said, about their loved one who passed. But we also need to be, something I feel very strongly about is we need to talk about death more often. It seems crazy, but it's the way we live our lives to the fullest is when we don't live in fear of it, but we treat it like any other life event because we can't avoid it.
Right. We're going to die. Yeah. Everybody's going to die. And, if you can die with dignity and, have your family, your friends, or, whatever you need to give you that peace at the end of your life is a wonderful thing. Yeah. So, yes. Yeah. So anyway, well, it was great having you on the show. I enjoyed it. And if they want to get in touch with you, you have your website and your phone number. Yep. We'll have that, have that information for the audience. Okay. So sounds good. Yeah, it was great. Thank you. It was nice having you on the show. I look forward to our next episode of Time with Terry. And if you'd like to be part of the conversation, you can email me with your questions, ideas, and concerns at timewithterryshow@gmail.com. And just a reminder, reach out to someone today and be a blessing, and you'll be blessed too. Bye.